What was there before everything? We ask this question today, but thousands of years ago, the ancestors living on the dusty plains of Mesopotamia, on the riverbanks of the Indus Valley, in the rainforests of the Yucatan, and in the vast deserts of Australia were asking exactly the same thing, separated by thousands of kilometers, bound by no shared text, no common language, no trade route connecting them. They all arrived at the same impossible starting point. Before the world, there was formlessness. Before light, darkness. Before land, water. Before the cosmos, chaos. Every single one of them. And that alone should stop you in your tracks. But here is what makes this truly extraordinary. The moment creation begins, the moment the stillness finally breaks, every tradition makes a completely different choice. A god kills a dragon and builds the world from her body. A giant sacrifices himself and becomes the earth. A word is spoken into the void. A small fish swims into a man's hands and warns him the world is about to end. A song is sung and a rock appears. These are not variations of the same story. They are different answers to the same question. And those differences reveal something far more interesting than the similarities, because what a civilization believes about the beginning of the world tells you everything about how it believes the world should work. Today, we are going to decode the oldest writings humanity has ever produced, not as myth, not as folklore, but as what they truly are, the most precise self-portraits each civilization ever made, written at the moment of their deepest self-examination. If you are ready, let us go back to before the beginning. The oldest written creation account we have comes from Mesopotamia, around 1100 BCE, drawing on Sumerian oral traditions. Centuries older, still a text, called the Enuma Elish, was carved into clay tablets in the city of Babylon. It opens with two vast bodies of primordial water that have not yet separated: Apsu, the freshwater abyss beneath the earth, and Tiamat, the salt sea. They mingle in the dark, without boundary, without name, without distinction. From their mingling, the first gods are born spontaneously, the way crystals precipitate from a saturated solution, undesigned, unintended. The younger gods grow noisy and disruptive, conflict erupts, and eventually Tiamat herself, vast, dragon-like, the living embodiment of the primordial ocean, goes to war. The champion god Marduk faces her, traps her in a net of winds, drives a spear through her belly, and kills her. He splits her body in two. From one half, he makes the vault of the sky. From the other, the earth. Her eyes become the sources of the Tigris and Euphrates. Her spittle becomes clouds and rain. And from the blood of the slain general Kingu, mixed with clay, he fashions humanity created specifically to serve the gods, to carry the labor of the cosmos so that the gods can rest. Now ask why. Why does the most powerful civilization of the ancient Near East build its creation story around violent combat, divine dismemberment, and humans manufactured as a labor force? The answer is geography and economics. The Tigris and Euphrates were catastrophically unpredictable every spring. Floodwaters poured down the flat alluvial plain with little warning, destroying crops and cities alike. The same rivers that made the soil fertile enough to support the world's first cities made life a perpetual negotiation with destruction. And defending that civilization against the flood required something very specific: massive, coordinated human labor. Digging irrigation canals, building levees, dredging channels year after year, without interruption, organized under centralized authority. The older Akkadian text the Enuma Elish draws on the Atrahasis epic makes this subtext explicit. Before humans exist, the lesser gods are forced to dig irrigation canals for the greater ones. They revolt. They burn their tools and surround the palace of the chief god Enlil. Humanity is then created specifically to take over this divine labor. The cosmos, in the Mesopotamian understanding, is a construction site. The gods are management, humans are the workforce. And the creation myth reflects the social structure of the civilization that produced it with startling precision, because creation myths never float free of the cultures that make them. They grow from those cultures the way a plant grows from soil. shaped by the specific fears, resources, and power arrangements of the civilization that needs them. Move west across the Sinai to the Hebrew tradition and notice what changes and why. The Book of Genesis, reaching its current form during and after the Babylonian exile, was written by Israelite scribes living inside Mesopotamian culture, fully aware of the Enuma Elish. They knew the story. They chose to tell it differently, and every difference is a deliberate argument. In Genesis, God does not battle chaos. There is no Tiamat, no combat, no dismembered body. God speaks, and what he says comes into being. Let there be light, and there was light. The Creator stands entirely outside the creation. He does not become it, is not made of it, does not need to fight for it. And when he creates humanity, he does not manufacture it from slaughtered divine blood for the purpose of labor. He forms it from the earth, breathes his own breath into its nostrils, and declares it very good. The human being bears the Tselem Elohim, the image of God. In the ancient Near East, the image of a king was placed in provincial temples to represent his sovereign authority across the land. To say that every human being carries this image, not the king alone, not the priests alone, every person of every status, was an extraordinary political statement. The Babylonian story says, "You were made from a slain God's blood. You exist to serve. Your labor is the point of you." The Genesis story says, "You carry the image of the Creator. The world was entrusted to your care." These differences are not theological accidents. They are arguments made by a people who had spent decades in exile in an empire whose own creation myth justified their enslavement, using the only weapon available to those without political power: story. In Egypt, the creation traditions multiply into something more philosophically complex than anything in the ancient Near East. Egypt did not produce one creation myth. It produced at least three, each centered in a different city, each making a different claim about what creation fundamentally was, and each reflecting the priorities of the priestly institution and the economic function of the city that produced it. In Hermopolis, the oldest theological school, 8 primordial deities, the Ogdoad, personify the qualities of the void before creation: dark, primordial waters, absolute darkness, infinite, undifferentiated space, hiddenness. These are not active gods. They are the properties of nothingness itself, given names so they can be thought about. Hermopolis is saying, before creation, there was not nothing. There was a very specific kind of something: water, dark, infinite, hidden with real qualities that had to be overcome for a world to become possible. In Memphis, the great commercial capital where the products of all Egypt converged, the god Ptah creates by thinking and speaking. He conceives the world in his heart. The Egyptians located intelligence in the heart, not the brain and what his heart conceives. His tongue names into existence. In a city where language was the primary instrument of power, where contracts and decrees organize the flow of an empire, the god of creation creates through language. And in Heliopolis, the center of sun worship, the sky goddess Nut and the earth god Geb are born locked in an embrace so total that nothing can exist between them. The god Shu must physically tear them apart, must force open the space between sky and earth before life becomes possible. Creation here is separation. The world exists only in the distance between things that belong together and cannot bear to be apart. Egypt maintained all three of these accounts simultaneously, without choosing between them, without resolving them into a single, unified story. And this is itself the deepest philosophical statement the Egyptian tradition makes. The mystery of existence is larger than any single story can contain. Water and potential, mind and language, embrace and forced separation, all of it true, none of it complete. To insist on one answer is to lose something the others preserve. Travel east to the Indian subcontinent, and the Rig Veda, the oldest religious text still actively used anywhere on earth, contains the most extraordinary creation account in any ancient tradition. The Nasadiya Sukta, hymn 10.129, begins not with an answer but with a negation. There was neither existence nor non-existence then, neither space nor the sky beyond. What stirred? In whose protection was there water, bottomlessly deep? Then, through the power of tapas, the heat of concentrated ascetic will and focused intention, the one breathed without breath, and desire arose, the first seed of mind. And then the poem does something no other ancient creation text has ever done. It stops and admits it does not know, but who really knows? Who can declare it? The gods came later than this creation, so who knows from where it arose? He from whom this creation arose, whether he made it or did not, he who surveys it from the highest heaven, he alone knows. Or perhaps even he does not know, a creation hymn that ends in doubt. 3,000 years ago, a Vedic poet stared into the mystery of existence and had the intellectual courage to say, "I cannot know." Perhaps the Creator himself cannot know. This is not the failure of ancient thought, it is its highest achievement. Why did this form of honesty emerge in India and not in Babylon or Egypt? Because the Vedic tradition carried a powerful strand of inquiry, not bound to the political needs of empire, not to justify labor extraction, not to legitimate a ruling class, not to explain why the floods came or why the sun rose. The Vedic sages were asking the question for its own sake. And when you ask a question purely, without needing any particular answer, you sometimes reach the place where honesty is the only response left. In China, the Pangu myth, recorded in the 3rd century CE but far older in oral form, begins with an egg. The universe is a formless chaos shaped like a hen's egg, and inside it the giant Pangu sleeps for 18,000 years. When he wakes and stretches, the shell cracks. The light yang rises to become the sky. The heavy yin sinks to become the earth. Pangu stands between them, growing 10 feet taller each day to prevent the sky from collapsing back onto the earth for another 18,000 years. And then he dies. And his body becomes the world. His breath becomes the wind, his voice thunder, his left eye the sun, his right the moon, his blood the rivers, his flesh the soil, his bones the mountains, his hair the stars. Like Mesopotamia, China builds its cosmos from a body, but the emotional register is entirely different. Tiamat is an enemy, slaughtered in battle. Pangu gives himself. The Mesopotamian cosmos carries the residue of war. The Chinese cosmos carries the residue of a gift. This is not a stylistic difference. It reflects a fundamental divergence in how these two civilizations understood the relationship between the individual and the world. Mesopotamian thought, shaped by competing city-states and catastrophic floods, conceived of order as something that must be won by force and continuously defended against chaos. The Chinese philosophical tradition, particularly Taoism, which the Pangu myth anticipates and expresses, conceived of that relationship as participation rather than conquest. The Tao does not act. It is the nature of things, the pattern things follow when nothing interferes. Pangu does not design or command the world. He becomes it. And the implication for human beings is profound. You are not separate from the natural order, struggling to master it. You are an expression of it. And the natural order. Cross to Mesoamerica and the Popol Vuh, the sacred narrative of the Quiche Maya and the creation tradition introduces a dimension of meaning that has no parallel anywhere in the Old World. Here, creation begins as a conversation. The sovereign plumed serpent and the god heart of sky sit above a dark, motionless sea and discuss what should exist. They name things, and as they name them, those things appear. But then they attempt to create beings who will worship them, who will remember their names, who will mark the days. Their first attempt, humans made from mud, dissolves. Their second attempt, humans made from wood, walks and speaks and reproduces, but has no soul, no memory of its makers, no capacity for gratitude. The wooden people are hollow. They exist without awareness that they exist. The gods destroy them in a black rain. Only on the third attempt, when the gods shape human beings from white and yellow maize ground, soaked in water, formed into dough, do they succeed. Maize was not simply a food crop in Mesoamerica. It was the foundation of Maya civilization. The Maya calendar revolved around its agricultural cycle. Physical development, health, survival, all were tied to its availability. To say that humanity was made from maize was not poetry. It was a precise philosophical claim. You are what sustains you. The farmer and the crop are not as separate as you think. And the deeper claim is this: the wooden people failed not because they were wicked, but because they lacked consciousness, the capacity for perception, memory, and gratitude. The Maya gods do not want servants, they want witnesses, beings who can look at the world, understand that it is extraordinary, and say so. In the Norse tradition, preserved in the prose Edda but rooted in oral poetry far older, creation begins in Ginnungagap, the yawning void between the realm of ice to the north and the realm of fire to the south. Where warmth meets ice in the void, drips form, and from those drips emerge Ymir, the first frost giant, and Audhumla, the primordial cow. The gods eventually slay Ymir and build the 9 worlds from his body. Flesh becomes earth, blood, the seas, bones, the mountains, skull, the dome of the sky. Like Mesopotamia, the Norse build the cosmos from a body, but unlike Tiamat, Ymir is not a villain, he is raw material, and crucially, the Norse gods know that the world they are building will not last. The Norns, the 3 weavers of fate, spin out destinies that even Odin cannot alter. The world will end in Ragnarok. Fire, flood, the gods themselves dying in the catastrophe. And then, only then, a new world will rise from the waters. The Norse creation is inseparable from the Norse apocalypse, because in this cosmology, creation and destruction are the same cycle at different phases. The world was made from a death, it will end in death, and between those 2 deaths, you are expected to live fully, act honorably, and face what comes without flinching. This is a creation myth, shaped by a civilization that knew in its bones that nothing lasts brutal winters, violent seas, the constant nearness of mortality, and found in that impermanence not despair, but a particular kind of fierce, clear-eyed courage. In North America, across dozens of indigenous traditions, from the Ojibwe to the Cherokee to the Crow, the creation of the world follows a pattern called the Earth Diver. The world is covered by primordial water. Beings attempt to dive to the bottom of the ocean to bring up earth from which dry land can be made. The largest and most powerful fail. A muskrat, small, exhausted, nearly drowned, returns from the deep with a pinch of mud in its paw. This mud is placed on the back of a great turtle and spreads to become a continent. Turtle Island, many traditions still call it. In every old world creation myth, the world is made by the most powerful available force. In the Earth Diver tradition, the world is made by the most persistent creature, the one willing to try again after all others have given up. This is a cosmology of endurance over power, of relationship over conquest. You do not win the world by defeating chaos. You build it, one small handful at a time, and you rest it on the back of something that will carry it without complaint for as long as it is needed. Finally, the Aboriginal Australian tradition, rooted in cultures that have continuously inhabited the continent for at least 65,000 years, making them the oldest living religious traditions on Earth. Here, the creation takes a form that challenges every assumption every other tradition takes for granted. The dreaming is not a past event. It is not a story about what happened before the world existed. The ancestral beings who shaped the landscape did not create it and leave. They are still creating it. As they moved across the featureless dark landscape, they sang, and the songs called things into being: this rock, this river, this animal, this waterhole. The paths they walked are song lines, invisible lines of sacred geography extending across the entire continent. To know a songline is to know the land not abstractly, but as a living document written on the earth itself. And every ceremony performed on country, every song sung in the right place at the right time, is a participation in the ongoing creative act. Stop singing, and the world does not merely become less meaningful. It begins to unravel. Creation, here, is not past. It is a present responsibility. The question is not how did the world begin, it is how do we keep the world alive, right now, today. Now, hold all of these together. Mesopotamia says, the cosmos was won in battle, and humans exist to do the labor that maintains order. Israel says you carry the divine image, and the world was entrusted to your care. Egypt says, truth has multiple faces and requires multiple stories, none of them complete alone. India says the deepest honesty is to admit you cannot fully know, and perhaps the Creator cannot either. China says yield to the nature of things rather than fighting them, as Pangu yielded to the separation of sky and earth. The Maya say you are made of what sustains you, and your capacity for gratitude is what makes you human. The Norse say the world is impermanent and will end, and this is precisely why how you live in it matters. North America says the world is built by the persistent, not the powerful, and the Aboriginal tradition says creation is not past, it is now, it is always, and it requires your participation. These are not simply cosmologies, they are instructions for living, embedded in the oldest stories ever told. What a civilization believes about the origin of the world reveals, with startling precision, what it believes about the purpose of human life. Before the world existed, every tradition agrees on this much. There was formlessness, darkness, water, potential, and then something broke open, and the world poured in. What that something was, and what it means for how you live, is a question that has been open as long as there have been human beings to ask it, and every answer is still waiting for you.